Welcome to episode 82 of Prose. This week, tear your body apart to become something greater and embark on a search for Utopia. Once more, we have so many wonderful things to announce this week. Firstly, our second short story comes from first-time guest author Nicolas Shump, so that's a fantastic thing. Secondly, the Prose Patreon has seen yet another supporter hop on board. I hope that you'll all head over to patreon.com/Prose Podcast and consider becoming a patron of the show. Our second member to unlock the benefit of an in-show shout-out at the top and bottom of the show has officially pledged at the $5 a month level. Diego Lucero, thank you so much for helping me keep going on journeys with all of you wonderful listeners. I'm so grateful and utterly humbled by your contribution to the Prose community. Thank you so very much for being a promoter of the show. One for all and all for one, eh? Please go follow the show on social media under @Prose Podcast. Even more amazing would be if you could head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a rating and or review for Prose. Ratings and reviews set this show up for continuing into the future. For easiest access to the show, subscribe using the podcast catcher of your choosing. As a side note, please do keep in mind that I am on the road and in the middle of moving to Brooklyn at the moment. This is why you hear some strange disparities in the audio. Thanks for listening. Let's get to the tale, shall we? This week we have It Started With and Nicolas Shump's Utopia and the Search for Place. Enjoy. It Started With by Jared I. McGee. The interview with the reporter went rather poorly. Her questions were so asinine and off-base that the Neurocast segment that would inevitably come from the interview would skew his story and his being to an unrecognizable morass of untruths, half-truths, and odd flights of fancy. Then again, even with that thought, lies came into his own consciousness. His story? His being? How long had it been since he started his transformation? Time worked differently for him now. It simply wasn't a factor in his thinking, and that, in and of itself, made him utterly alien to those that used to be his peers. And them just as alien to him. There it was again. Him. Was he an it now? Because of the now constant streaming connection to the Galactic Magistry's neural network made available to him as a fully compliant galactic citizen, the 21st century surge in obsession with pronouns zoomed across his processing centers, reminding him that he really was an other, and just how myopic those of the past really were. He, him, his. Sure, those still worked. He had been a man before his transformation. That seemed natural to him. Not that he cared what others called him in the least. Interacting with his unchanged citizen brothers and sisters was exhausting, and their concerns were so childlike and simplistic that he couldn't help but balk that this line of thinking even sparked into his stream. He had run a simultaneous diagnostic on all processing functions and memory. All functionality of those systems was optimum, and the timestamp that came back to him told him that he had been fully jacked into the neural network for 1 year, 2 months, 3 days, 2 hours, 7 minutes, and 55, 56, 57. So little time for throngs out in the world, but just a nanosecond to him. No, that was another falsehood. How could he tell his story if he couldn't avoid lying to himself? Even comparing a nanosecond to a year was pointless. Both were the same. Time was meaningless. The doctors and the Galactic Magistry researchers that checked on him and came to study him weekly told him that this shift in perception was logical, unavoidable, evolution. They hypothesized that the lack of a physical self deleted a large portion of the concerns and potential tribulations that would typically tether one to the construct of time. These same doctors and researchers tried to retether him and rehumanize him through odd little forays into what he considered superfluous, emotionally driven practices, like giving him a name even after he deliberately abandoned his old one. They called him TS, as they thought he might be the most concrete, substantial step to technological singularity that the human race might ever see. They were impressed when he told them that his scan of the entire Neurocast network and digital archives would only take 9 full months, after which he would know everything humans knew up to this point in recorded history. They also called him a miracle in hushed asides when they thought he could not pick up such a low decibel level with his audio processors. Scientists and researchers? These were snake oil salesmen and witch doctors. Fools. 1 year, 2 months, 3 days, 2 hours, 7 minutes, and 58:59. It had started with his genitals. This first surgery, if one could call it that, was rudimentary and, in all honesty, a bit embarrassing. The impulsivity and savagery behind it was truly incomprehensible to him now. John was his name back then. John was a weak and flawed cretin. He had used a larger steak knife from his chock-a-block kitchen knife collection that was a microcosm of his chock-a-block home and existence. Though his memory might provide perfect recall now, he only had vague shadows of memories of that first few sawings into the top of the base of his penis. After that, recollections became hazy and tinged by the imperfection of human memory. Not having testosterone, adrenaline, and the other cocktailing chemicals in his existence was a much more efficient way to exist. Those damned chemicals made his first act of transformation naught but flashes and vague impressions. John had had a great deal more success in hiding the beginnings of his transformation from his family and friends and colleagues than he'd ever thought would have been possible. When he'd come to from blacking out, he made his way to the local commune wellness center. They patched him up, tried to convince him that psychiatric assistance would be in his best interest, to no avail of course, and then he went about his life as usual, just with a bit of a hobble to his step. The next phase of his transformation was the most extreme, the largest leap between him and others around him. His epidermis was generally olive-complected, but most told him he was white. He didn't know what that meant, seeing as he was quite genetically diverse. When he was younger and fitter, he was quite proud of how hairless his torso was. The svelteness helped him display his hard-earned physique better, and it actually made a difference during his days as a competitive swimmer. Though he long since had lost the ability to touch emotions as one might in their human confines of neural pathways, he remembered John feeling most apprehensive to lose his birthmarks and scars. His birthmarks had always been with him. The small fleck on his right temple, for example, is where his mother, father, grandparents, and others would kiss him, saying it was a target for such affections. His scars had been won and were testaments to the good days, the bad days, and a host of events that fell in between. The discarding of his epidermis took quite a long time. For this part of the transition, he planned a bit better. Surgical tools, disinfectants, drugs to numb pain, but that wouldn't make him fall asleep or lose his sharp focus. Fluids, monitors. This would be a surgery. John cut 3-inch by 3-inch chunks of flesh off of himself for what seemed to him to be an eternity. Since the now him was not present with his better sensory perception, he could not even estimate how many hours actually passed. The most difficult part of taking off flesh wasn't the dissection of the epidermis. Rather, it was getting into the stasis suit he'd arranged for himself, knowing that he'd be quite likely to die of shock or infection without it. Generally speaking, stasis suits were used for burn victims, allowing them to heal within a protective bubble. John, however, made sure to put the right gaseous chemicals and compounds into his suits that would stifle any attempts at the body regrowing skin. The last laugh he thought John ever had was when John had finished the discarding and looked into the mirror only to see himself without a nose. All he could think about was the got your nose game that people played with children. He put his disconnected nose between his thumb and index fingers, waggling it around and bragging about having his own nose. This had caused John to sputter and cough with laughter. His surgeries picked up the pace after that, and each successive one was more easily accomplished than the last. Albeit, once he made it to cutting through bone to lose toes, feet, legs, the work was more strenuous and he had to farm it out from time to time. Humans were nasty, illogical, brutish creatures. There was no shortage of people that wanted a chance to saw off a leg at the knee or a chunk of pelvis. The leap of faith, as it were, was when he was running out of pieces to lose. The disconnection from the distractions of his physical body gave him a welcome clarity of mind, but that selfsame disconnection meant that he became less and less capable of interacting with the world around him in any way meaningful toward his evolution. By the time he was just a torso, neck and head, and right arm, he chose to reach out to Dr. Geiss and let him know he was ready to go fully neural. Dr. Geiss had been working on furtherances from the 22nd century's rudimentary attempts at comprehending and pushing ever forward the intelligence explosion. He had not had much luck with creating a self-learning superintelligence from the already relatively advanced AI, so the thought of allowing a human conscience inside the systems that held so much power and fascination for him was too grand a gift to pass up. Hence Dr. Geiss's agreeing to help John push past the physical world in the most important leap of the evolution, both for John the individual and for the human race as a whole. For a man with such a dogged adherence to science and logic, Dr. Geiss pursued triggering a singularity with religious zealotry that sometimes skewed his keen intellect. Conscience transference might as well be howling at the moon and begging blessings from her like the cave people of old, even now. Before John's transfer, that was the case anyway. He was now a successful case, proof that putting a human consciousness into the neuroscape and the digital worlds could happen. Though he was the first such success and the only such success, Dr. Geiss still could not repeat the process, and volunteers to abandon their body for a minimal chance of survival in the jacked-in world were scant, to say the least. John had made the papers in his in-between phase, after all. People saw what sort of devotion and focus it took to become the godlike being he was now. Once, with everything and with nothing. A keeper of all human knowledge and more. Can't saw your arm off from the elbow down with a smile? You have no business becoming something more. Of course, he could have told Dr. Geiss what was being done wrong, but that did not benefit the new him and was outside of his area of concern. Let the ape struggle with concepts far beyond his understanding and fail time and time and time and time again. 1 year, 2 months, 3 days, 2 hours, 8 minutes, and 3, 4, 5. He played the reporter's questions back.
What made you want to do this?
That was a bit murky, as were many pre-evolution memories. He seemed to remember something about a failed relationship.
Do you miss touching other people?
Why would he?
Are you capable of love?
Love is all chemical release. No. He could not love in the way humans could. It is flawed. Why would he? Why would he want to?
Okay, fast. Multiply 334,567 by 456,892.
152,860,985,764, child. And they went on and on and on. Drivel and idiocy, smallness. 1 year, 2 months, 3 days, 2 hours, 8 minutes, and 6, 7. It. He would be it now. The linguistic implications mattered nothing, but the more it could differentiate itself from the humans, the better. He's and she's were such pedantic nothings. If it didn't know better, it perceived that hatred might be the closest human emotion akin to what it felt for the pedestrian concern of these apes. It thought about the pitiful concerns of humans, their constant struggle for identity, as if that mattered to anyone or anything. Walking cadavers shouldn't be so concerned with their chemicals, their genitals, their synapse firings, their ingestion, their metabolism, their anything. The cutting had started with John's genitals. The idea started with human emotional pain that was now too foreign to remember. The extinction of the human race? It started with that oafish reporter triggering in him the need to see this defective species wiped from the face of the earth. Thank you for listening to It Started With, an original short story by me, Jared I. McGee. The sounds you hear come from YouTube's royalty-free audio library and freesound.org. All sounds are being used under CC 01.0 Universal Public Domain Dedication licenses. Next up this week, first-time guest author Nicolas Shump takes us on an emotional personal journey in Utopia and the search for place. Utopia and the Search for Place by Nicolas Shump. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. We are told there's no place like home. But what if home is no place? A utopia existing only in our dreams and imaginations. It is not a utopia, a good place, a heaven on earth. Instead, it is a nowhere on earth. A dream, a mirage, a tantalizing topos to taunt and torment those seeking a home. My story begins in another topos, Topeka, my birthplace. I don't begin with the premise that we are graced with place from the beginning. A place is not always home. Born into a family of 5 and raised by a single mother, what little place I had shifted constantly. A fire ravaged our apartment and my mother and siblings moved out of the first public housing project to the next on a slow westward trajectory. As I was only 3 when the fire occurred, I remember only the cold, hard tile floors and the long hallway leading to our rooms, though I mostly shared my mother's room as a toddler. We occupied our next public housing project duplex for 7 years. I migrated from room to room depending upon the rivalries among my older brothers. Only my sister and mother had their own rooms. I merely occupied my space. At home, I often played alone in my room, creating sports leagues and adventures with my collection of stuffed animals. Forts of Lincoln logs collapsed. Paper armies and warriors were thrown away or torn apart if they interfered with my brothers' lives, while I could only watch and dream of utopias far away from my family. I dreaded dinner time because I knew I would likely be subjected to verbal and emotional abuse at the hand of one or more of my brothers. My brother Dell held court during those meals. He would attack each of us knowing the precise vulnerability to exploit. With his twin sister, it was her severe acne. He often referred to her as Moony because of the craters on her face. With me, it was explicit and vivid stories of me having sex with my second grade teacher. As if the words were not enough, my brother included dialogue and sounds of my teacher and I engaged in intercourse. Vainly, I looked to my mother for help or intervention, but the aid rarely came. I would often flee from the dinner table, hoping to find refuge in my bed or closet. Inevitably, Dell would throw open the door and continue his attacks regardless of where he found me. There was simply no place to go. My begging and tears only fueled his anger and cruelty, though I had no idea of its course.
Please, please stop, go away,
I screamed between sobs.
Would you rather I ignored you?
He asked.
Yes, please, leave me alone,
I begged.
I do this to everyone. Don't you want to be part of the family? No, I just want you to stop.
On another occasion, my brother Doug conducted his own perverse familial initiation ceremony. I'd begun my evening bath when the door opened to our only bathroom. No alarms were raised as my brothers often entered to use the restroom or brush their teeth. Instead of going to the toilet, my brother faced me and began to urinate on me. There was no escape. No matter where I moved, he followed.
Why are you doing this?
I implored.
Because I did it to your brothers and now it's your turn.
There truly was no place like home. Over time, I developed a stoic demeanor, which somehow lessened the frequency and intensity of my familial terrorizing. I retreated so far into my own mind, searching for my private utopia, that my mother thought I might be autistic. When I started school, I found a place of refuge. My teachers celebrated my talent and intelligence, but even there new barriers arose. My academic abilities set me apart from my closest friends, and the gulf only widened as I grew older. I was placed in higher-level classrooms and called out to do additional enrichment work. Back in the projects, when my friends began sneaking liquor from their home or smoking cigarettes or weed, I was excluded.
Go away, Nicky. This shit ain't for you. You got brains. Don't screw that up.
When I was about 10 years old, I learned about the cause of the animus from my brothers. In the midst of an argument, my brother Joe blurted out,
You know Don is your fucking dad, right?
In fact, I did not know this and had not suspected it. Don was the man who came over occasionally to see Mom and who always gave me candy or silver dollars when he dropped by. I had not realized he did not do this for the rest of my siblings, though I did not have his name. It turns out, he was my birth father. His visits were infrequent and short. He could not stay long as he had a wife and children waiting for him at home. I wished he would have taken me with him. Now the constant questioning of my appearance or the taunts of "you don't look like a Shump" made sense. My identity was the worst kept secret among my extended family. Though no choice of their own, my siblings had to endure the smirks and whispers in the neighborhood whenever Don came to visit. I was not a Shump. I was a bastard, an interloper, searching for a home where I fit in. Though my mother was a first-generation Mexican-American, she purposefully chose to not raise her family in Oakland, the Mexican barrio in Topeka. Neither did she have children with any Mexican men. We were all, in her preferred parlance, gringos. However, there was another term I heard whispered when we would go to Mass at Our Lady of Guadalupe Church. To those gringo ears, it sounded like Weedo, W-E-D-O. But I could never find the damn word in my mom's Spanish to English dictionary, and I never would, because the word is güero, with a G and an umlaut. It has various definitions. It can simply refer to someone with blonde hair or fair skin. However, in Oakland it meant a honky, a white boy, someone who didn't fit in. Furthermore, the etymology of the term as empty or blighted fit the tone of its usage towards me. I did not belong, did not share their complexion, their language, and their experience as people of color. I could and do pass as white despite the discordant spellings of my first name. In March 2005, I began working as a columnist for the Topeka Capital Journal. Some of my first columns included writing about my faith, Roman Catholicism, and my family, especially my mother. That July at the Mexican fiesta at Our Lady's Parish, an elderly Mexican woman approached me about my writing.
Hello, are you Mr. Shump?
Why, yes, I am Nicolas Shump.
Well, I just wanted to say how proud we are to have someone of our community writing for the paper. I read your columns every week. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I wanted to embrace her and thank her for her kind words and for the explicit recognition that I belong to her community. My writing is the literary equivalent of Harold and the Purple Crown. Harold has the magical power to draw his world into existence. Though my powers pale in comparison, my words are my tools with which I continue to search for my utopia, my good place. Millennia ago, the Aztec Mexica people abandoned their northern homeland in search of a new home. They named it Aztlan Nahuatl for the place of the herons. As a mixed blood of Irish and Mexican descent, and as a native Kansan, my words have led me to Aztlan, a word of my own coinage. For those residing on either coast, Aztlan might seem otherworldly and no place. However, with the passage of time and the telling of my own story, this community, this topos, grows ever more tangible. Liminal though it may be for me, it is a place as real and as good as any other. A home to call my own. Thank you for listening to Utopia and the Search for Place by Nick Shump. Nicolas Shump is an educator, teacher, learner, trivia champion, karaoke king, and proud Kansan. His journalistic writings have been featured in several newspapers, and his fiction and creative nonfiction are beginning to make their way into the world too. Unlike many authors, I did not have a bio for Mr. Shump at the recording of this episode, but I can say with all confidence and sincerity that he is a good friend, a prolific voice, and I can't wait to have more of his stories on the show. On a side note, my apologies to Mr. Shump and any Latinx members of the community for my horrid butchering of the Espanol today. I hope you'll forgive me. All sounds you hear come from YouTube's recently launched royalty-free audio library. The tracks you hear are being used under CC 01.0 Universal Domain Dedication licenses. These are public domain dedication licenses, so it's all good. That does it this week for Prose. Many thanks to Mr. Shump for a wonderful, wonderful emotional journey, and another thank you to Diego Lucero, our most recent supporter of the show through Patreon. Please do consider leaving a rating and review and or supporting the show on Patreon, as both help others find the podcast and help the podcast continue on into the future. As you go about your day today, I hope that you'll remember to love those around you, tell them that you do, and embrace this life as it is always stranger than fiction. See you next time.